Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. All right, so happy Uposatha, everybody. And this evening, I thought to give a reflection on, as I usually do, because I don't know what's going on in your lives necessarily. I'll give a reflection on what's been going on in my own life. And the last couple of weeks, we've had a number of temporary ordinations here at the monastery I'm staying at. And this means people come, they ordain for a short period of time. Usually they decide ahead of time how long it's going to be. And then they disrobe at the end, having an experience that not everybody can get in this lifetime, of what it's like to be a monastic. But even though they're doing it only for temporary period of time, during that window of time, they take on a whole lot of extra precepts and observances. And the way that the Sayadaw, the head monk here, phrased it is he's like, at the time that the ordination ceremony finishes, all of these precepts spontaneously arise within your heart. So you don't need to worry too much about learning them all. You're already following them, which is actually, I mean, it's technically true, right? Because while you're sitting there, politely, respectfully listening to the head monk, you're not breaking any of the precepts. You're not breaking any of the monastic observances, and you're even following a couple, right? So it's true. From that starting point, your sila is pure. You have nothing to confess. You're doing good. The troubles then start to arise once you stand up. And this is a similar situation that we all experience when we sit in meditation. We find that regardless of whatever emotions or thought patterns or habits might be occurring in our minds, because we're not speaking and because we're not acting by way of bodily volition, we're not really committing any crimes. We're not breaking any precepts. We're not getting ourselves in any trouble. We're not creating karma that we will then have to experience the consequences of, except by way of creating the karma, the sort of non-fruit, non-resultant karma of renunciation, of not producing karma, by sitting in meditation and by experiencing thoughts, emotions, ideas, and not acting on them. We're doing the second kind of karma, the karma that doesn't create resultant, right? So we then we have that difficulty once we finish the meditation because as human beings with a human body, we cannot be in meditation indefinitely. And this is true even of the arahants, even of those with the highest of psychic powers. They can be in meditation for up to 7 continuous days. And then probably very shakily, they have to get up. They have to go and eat, right? There's no way around that. Even the Buddha was shackled by this difficulty of being in a human body, right? And once we go out into the world, then even if we started from a pure slate, even if we started from good sila, we're going to necessarily, just because we're in an imperfect world, be subject to all sorts of situations where it's up to our faith and our wisdom to help us figure out the right course of action, right? Because the book can be very clear. You don't kill, don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie, don't drink, practice non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. It's very easy in a technical sense what the right answer to a situation is. But once we get out, as I don't need to tell you, once you get out and you actually start trying to do that, you realize you're being presented with situations that are not black and white, that are not clear cut. Almost everything that happens in your life will be some measure of gray. Now, there will be a couple of circumstances where the answer is clear and obvious. The precepts give us a good example of this. There'll be, an animal in your way, and you'll be like, should it's in your way. Should you kill it? Should you hurt it? Should you do something to get it out of your way? And you would know because of the first precept that would be bad. That would be wrong. Now, in certain circumstances, you may have to not be nice to an animal. It's a great example of a monk. I think it might have been Hakuin, to be honest, a Zen master in ancient Japan, who had such loving kindness that all of the local deer felt totally safe and at peace in his temple. And so they would all just kind of mill about and they'd come up to people and they were just so friendly. But the problem was the local hunters in the nearby villages loved that because they would go out hunting and the deer would just walk right up to them and they wouldn't have to put any effort into hunting at all. And so when Hakuin found out about this, he realized what he was doing was kind and it was nice and it was filled with good intention for the animals, but it was not producing a good result. It was not actually good for them. It was not beneficial for them. And so he would, when he saw them, he would pick up a stick and he would go and he'd go, ah, and he'd run at them and chase them with the stick. And the deer would, anyway, this is very surprising. This is not how things usually go. And they would scatter into the forest. And eventually they learned humans are weird and unpredictable. Even the seemingly nice ones can have bad days where they pick up a stick and chase you, right? And so the deer become more wary, they survive longer, the situation is balanced out. I bring up that story too because it's a very interesting circumstance where a young monastic had traveled all over Japan looking for a great teacher, and he had heard about this wonderful Zen master at this one temple, and he had traveled hundreds of miles to go visit that temple. And as he walks up to the temple, he sees that very Zen master running through the grass with a stick, going ah, chasing away a bunch of deer. And he immediately he shook his head and he turned around and he left. Right? Because obviously the reports of this being a great enlightened master of loving kindness were completely false. Um, but this creates a very similar situation to what we have in our own practice, right? We have a lot of wonderful, joyful, fluffy ideas about how the practice is supposed to go. And then we get out into the real world and we've realized there's a lot of gray, there's a lot of compromise, right? Some of the things are pretty clear, like the precepts, but a lot of the things are not clear at all. Just thinking of like basic examples, like should you get up early to meditate, depending on your schedule? Now, this is not about the precepts. This is not a moral issue. Like meditation is not a requirement for human beings. It's not even a requirement for Buddhist practitioners. It is an extra practice. It is an extension of right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi, right? It's when you want to develop the Eightfold Path and you want to get to the destination quicker. But you can take the lazy route. You can stay in bed. Yeah. As long as you have right view, it's not required of you. But then the question comes up, you're decently good health. You got a decent amount of sleep. Is it appropriate for you to get up in the morning when it's the right time? Here at the monastery, there's no question. Like if you're not showing up at morning meditation, the head monk will notice, he will comment. You won't get away with it very long. But in your own lives, there's nobody to check in on you except your conscience, which might be even more imperious and aggravating. It might because it knows everything you do and it knows your motives and it knows whether they were pure, right? Your own conscience will check in on you and wake you up even if your alarm fails to, and remind you of what the right thing to do would be, right? But then this is not a strong moral issue. So how do you know what's the right thing to do? Yeah. How do you know when yeah, like the young monk who went up to the to see the Zen master and sees the Zen master with the stick. We encounter a lot of situations in our life where we think we know what's going on, but we could actually be wrong. And so how do we navigate this life that we got where a lot of the decisions that we have to make in practice and in life are fuzzy, unclear, gray, and involve some sort of compromise, yeah? And an interesting principle, and it's very much baked into Eastern philosophy and Eastern culture. I mean, you find it in Buddhism, but you also find it in Taoism and Confucianism. It's spread all over the Eastern Hemisphere. Is this idea that of flexibility, right, being a virtue. And I think it's a good example of when we encounter a situation that is unclear to us and we realize that we have to make a decision, we might sometimes find that we get stuck, we get caught. There are certain ideas or expectations or things that we anticipate that cause us to doubt ourselves, to second guess ourselves, to not be completely sure that maybe, well, this is the right way of doing things and that's the wrong way of doing things. And we get stuck. And it somatically, it feels very much like we have just planted our feet. Like this is the right way. That's the wrong way. Yeah, and it's very interesting because if we're ever in a situation where, like in the monastery, we're surrounded by a lot of other practitioners, we know almost instantly we're wrong, right? We know almost instantly, like just by virtue of the fact that we're attached to this particular way of doing things, it's the wrong way of doing things. We know that being attached is wrong, and yet we're operating on some idea or some expectation of what the right way of doing things are, and that's what we're clinging to. It's a very confusing situation, you know. It's like I've been told that this is the right way of doing things, and yet when I stick to that and I argue with everyone and I plant my feet and I say I absolutely will not do it the other way, I get in trouble. And everybody starts to advise me that maybe I'm not handling this situation appropriately, and maybe I should consider things. Yeah. I thought the idea of flexibility is actually, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You can see it. And this is the way it feels in our body. We take something rigid like this pen, it's made of plastic, and it's not flexible in the least. So this is like us when we're clinging to an idea. We have two options. Option one is that we can weather and resist any attempt to change our course of action, right? We can stay solid, or we can break. Yeah, and if you've stayed at a temple or a retreat center, a meditation retreat center, you've seen both of these. You've seen where somebody like just stays the course in front in the face of all advice to do something different, and everybody has to work around them. Or you see when somebody just breaks down. They're like, forget this. I wasn't having fun anyway. They storm out of the temple, and almost every, I would say almost every week, or but we don't have quite that many guests. But here at the temple, almost every month, we have somebody who shows up, says they're going to stay this amount of time, and they don't end up staying that amount of time. At some point during their stay, they encounter something that they just can't process. Yeah, or it could be something physical, it could be an idea, it could be something cultural, but they reach their limit and then they check out. Yeah, and this is us breaking. Yeah, why do we break? It's not because we don't have the ability to get through the situation. It's that we got stuck, and because we got stuck, we were limited in our options. We only have two options: stay or go. And this is a horrible situation to be in. And this is why when we experience it, we know immediately there's something wrong here, right? Because the Dhamma is supposed to be liberating. It's supposed to be freeing. It's supposed to be open, like the open sky. It's not supposed to be limited. We're not supposed to have just two choices, right? That doesn't sound like freedom. So we want to be like flexible. And right here I have a wire. And you can see in contrast to the pen made of plastic, this is also made of plastic, but made of plastic and rubber and copper. And you can see instead of two options, it has almost infinite options, simply by virtue of being flexible. It can go in any shape, but it retains its function, right? It's not destroyed by the process of bending to different circumstances. And this is similar to us in our practice. When we learn to um, rely on our faith and wisdom to guide us, but we don't get stuck on ideas and principles and expectations, but we try to work with the situations we got. We have guidelines, we have the Eightfold Path, we have the Four Noble Truths, we have the precepts, but we also know that to accurately translate these into life as a human being, we're going to have to wiggle a bit. We're going to have to figure out what the best answer in a situation is. And most of the time, it will be loving kindness. But 1 out of 100, we're going to have to pick up a stick and chase somebody away, right? 99 times out of 100, the monasteries is welcome everybody come and visit. And the one time out of 100, you have to call the police. This is samsara. It is like this, right? It is not a perfect place. But in the Buddhist teachings, there's a lot about striving. There's a lot about this. This is the right way. There's the right eightfold path, right view, right effort, right mindfulness, right? And the implication is that you know there's one way of doing things, and we're supposed to put forth effort, and we're supposed to get rid of all the greed, hatred, and delusion from our minds. Very clear expectations that don't always translate, but sometimes the Buddha was able to give certain teachings that I feel really encompass a sort of more generalized sense of when it's hard to look at the Eightfold Path or the Four Noble Truths or the five faculties or the aggregates or something like that, and use that as a blueprint, as a template for how we make our decisions. Here is another set of ideas you can rely on. And one of these that I'm familiar with and I'm quite fond of, I will try to share this here. Okay, I think maybe you can see that. There we go. Okay, so this is the Sankita Sutta, the Buddha's advice to Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī. And it's a very short sutta, so I'll just read it in its entirety. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Vesali at the great wood in the hall with the peaked roof. Then Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī went up to the Buddha, bowed, stood to one side, and said to him thus. Now, Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī was the Buddha's stepmother. His biological mother passed away 7 days after he was born, and Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī was another was the next wife of his father, King Suddhodana. So she was the one who raised him. So he had known her his entire life. He had been raised by her. And when she asked to be a bhikkhuni, after some back and forth and some compromise, because the Buddha did not want to, the way she asked was kind of put the Buddha at a spot. She brought a bunch of women with him and said, "Look, give us ordination. You said women can be enlightened, so we want to be monastics too." But the Buddha didn't have a bhikkhuni order set up, and it seemed like a lot of a burden. But there was some back and forth, there was some compromise, and the Buddha, with by laying down different sets of rules that the bhikkhuni order, the nuns would follow, He was able to establish a bhikkhuni order. And Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī, by virtue of being the one who showed up, who led the group, who asked for the creation of this order, she's the first bhikkhuni, the first nun. And but that didn't mean she was immediately enlightened. She still had to do all the work, just like we have to do our own work. And so this is after many different interactions with the Buddha, and after the order of bhikkhunis has grown in size. She's coming to the Buddha and she's saying, Venerable Sir, may the Buddha please teach me the Dhamma in brief. When I've heard it, I'll live alone, withdrawn, diligent, keen, and resolute. So she's reached a point where she's received a lot of Dhamma teachings in person and heard them secondhand from others who'd heard them from the Buddha. And she feels she's ready to just go and do it, to withdraw into seclusion, to practice diligently, and to reach the goal of the teaching. And the Buddha, very interestingly, because the life of bhikkhunis is not so hermetic as a bhikkhu would be. In ancient India, it was not a very safe place for women to be out on their own. So the way the bhikkhuni rules develop, it really encourages and sometimes even forces, in certain cases, the bhikkhunis to stay in community. So the way that they're practicing is going to be somewhat different at times from the way that the bhikkhus would get to practice. Is very feasible for a bhikkhu if they don't like the community they're in to just grab their bowl and robes and just walk down the road to just leave. Yeah, I don't want to put up with these people. I'm going to try somewhere else. But that wasn't always an option for the bhikkhunis. They had a lot more necessity to learn how to deal with all of the stuff I've been talking about so far. Is just all of these weird little situations we get in where we don't know other people's motives, we don't know the right way of doing things, and we have to figure out some way of being flexible and finding a compromise that stays true to the Dhamma, but also doesn't sacrifice important principles of how the Eightfold Path is supposed to develop. And so the Buddha gives her a teaching that is not so much oriented at going off withdrawn, alone, aloof from the world and meditating in private, but really hits at some ideas that are very useful for everything else. Yeah. So the Buddha responds, Gotami, you might know that certain things lead to passion, not dispassion, to yoking, not to unyoking, to accumulation, not dispersal, to more desires, not fewer, to a lack of contentment, not contentment, to crowding, not seclusion, to laziness, not energy, to being burdensome, not being unburdensome. Categorically, you should remember these things as not the teaching, not the training, not the teacher's instructions. That's very beautiful in the Pali. It says, Neso Dhammo, Neso Vinyo, Netang Satu Sasananti. This is not the Dhamma, this is not the Vinaya, this is not the teacher's instructions. And he says, you might know that certain things lead to dispassion, not passion, to unyoking, not to yoking, to dispersal, not to accumulation, to having few desires, not many, to contentment, not to a lack of contentment, to seclusion, not to crowding, to energy, not laziness, to being unburdensome, not being burdensome. Categorically, you can remember these things as the teaching, the training, and the teacher's instructions. Secure in a very straightforward way instead of giving this elaborate, interconnected set of conditions and teachings and mental concomitants. The Buddha is just pointing out some basic principles that we can use, we can rely on looking when we're making our decisions, what is the way of fulfilling these? Even if the answers to a situation, if we're being flexible, is not just yes or no, we're often we can intuit, we can figure out between these options which way we're headed. And so dispassion and not passion. This is dealing with desire. And so desire is very interesting because desire, there's three kinds of desire. There is kamatana, which is what we usually equate to desire, as desire for things or situations. But there's also bhavatanha, the desire for something to become a certain way, and vibhavatanha, the desire for something to not be a certain way. So even though we usually think of desire as trying to get something, sometimes what we're trying to get is to get away from something. We've got attraction, but we've also got repulsion. But then we've also got this third possibility, which is apathy. We're trying to not be involved in something that we're actually involved in. We're trying not to pay attention to something that is actually drawing our attention. Sometimes our desire and our passion is to just not have anything to do with it, to not care, to not be involved. And especially in community, we find that sometimes that desire gets us in the most trouble of all. Because if we live somewhere or we work somewhere or we are related to certain people, sometimes just by default we are involved. And it doesn't seem fair. But anytime that your mind screams at you, this is not fair, just train yourself to giggle. Because again, this is samsara. Yeah, nobody said this was going to be fair, right? So if you're getting caught on something because it's not fair, then you can know that you're getting caught on attachment. You're getting caught on passion for having something a certain way. You're not practicing dispassion. How can we learn renunciation? How can we learn non-ill will? How can we learn non-apathy to accept the situation and work with it? We've also got the idea of yoking, and this is some yogaya. Some yojana is what we call the fetters. If you've heard of the 10 fetters, these are the things that fall away progressively at each stage of enlightenment. So it's the same word, a fetter, a bond. The yoke is what bonds a horse or an ox to the cart that it's pulling. It also would bind a prisoner, for instance. So when we are trying to make a decision, is this going to increase the number of bindings that we have? Is this going to increase the number of things that we're responsible for, increase the number of duties that we have, increase the number of debts or things that we've got to pay for? If we look at it and we see that that's the case, we might suspect we're heading in the wrong direction if we're accumulating those things. And if you're in a job in an environment where you're trying to move up the corporate ladder, it might seem like a good idea to have more responsibilities, to get promoted, to be in charge of more people, to be in charge of more things, to have more things on your resume. But in the realm of the Eightfold Path in Buddhist practice, yeah, you're usually seeing that in a very balanced way. You're like, okay, yes, I'd have more responsibilities, which also mean I'd have more stress. I'd have less free time. It might even be something I am not particularly skilled at doing. So do I want to accumulate those sorts of things? The next one deals with that, with to dispersal, not with accumulation. So even beyond just bonds, things in general. And these are the attachments to people or situations. It really, in mental terms, is the same as to things. Yeah. So, say we're interested in getting in a relationship, in a romantic relationship. Well, we can know that this would have drawbacks. This would be a bond. This would be something that would yoke us. It would limit our options. It would limit our scope. It's not always the wrong answer, but it has to be taken with wisdom. It has to be understood. Likewise, we might think of getting a car. If we don't have a car, we might think of planning a trip, or we're not planning a trip. And sometimes we look at these things and do we need more stuff? Do we need more activities? Or do we have enough? Is it really a time to be adding things with all of the burdens that accumulation tends to bring? And you see this with practitioners. The more one starts to develop their meditation practice, the more you can look in their home environment, and it tends to simplify. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that meditators will get rid of all of their stuff, right? Because it might seem like the Dhamma is encouraging renunciation, right? So I should get rid of all my stuff, but that would be another form of desire, wouldn't it? The desire to shed or get rid of, desire to not put up with things. And what I'd say when you look at a meditator's dwelling, the way it simplifies is the attachments, often the stuff that they have. Like if you look up on the shelves, I have behind me, I don't think about those things at all during the course of the day. They're only there because um, throwing them out would take just as much energy as just not interacting with them. And on occasion, I do go through and I throw out things that I won't actively use. But sometimes, like a bottle of aspirin, I might not use it for a month. And then when I need it, it's useful that it's there. And this is the sort of dispassionate way of relating to things. You can have a bunch of stuff in your house and not be attached to it whatsoever. You don't have to get rid of it. But when you look at me as a practitioner, and if you were to track me moving through this room, you would see I use about 10% of the room. Right? If it was the case that every time I came in here, I had colorful dirt on my feet, there would be a single line tracks between the bathroom door and this the to the desk here where the computer and the setup is to my bed. There wouldn't be wandering. Like I'm not using most of this space. I'm just using what I need for practical purposes. And so there's no accumulation, there's no need of the rest of the stuff. There's a funny story of Ajahn Mahabua was a great and very known for being a very stern teacher. He's a Thai forest master, and he had a student, Ajahn. Oh no, I'm worried I'll get the name wrong. Um, Panyawado, I think. I hope I didn't get that wrong. Yeah, Panyawado. And he was an Englishman, and he had come to stay at this remote Thai monastery where Ajahn Mahabua taught. And he had learned the Thai language, and he had just integrated into the culture, and he had been there for decades. And it's not that Ajahn Mahabua had wanted to start this whole branch of his teaching for English speakers. But Ajahn Panyawado was able to do that. Anytime a Westerner would come to stay at the monastery, Ajahn Mahabua would give them instructions, but Ajahn Panyawado would help take care of them and help orient them and answer their questions so that they would be able to flourish in that environment in such a different culture. But a lot of the younger monastics and the way the younger monastics do, they would start to wonder, well, Ajahn Panyawado has been here so long. Where does the practice lead? Does it lead to him being, all wise and renouncing the world? And what's his level of attainment? I want to know. What level is he at? And they would go and they would look at his kuti, his cabin, where he had lived for years and years and years. And I've heard, I never saw it, but I've heard that it was just piled with books. There were books everywhere. And when one day, a group of these younger monastics, they went to Ajahn Mahabua kind of on the side, and they said, we're kind of worried. You tell us about, not accumulation and not having desires and having a tidy mind. You're always talking about keeping things tidy and clean and disciplined. And we just went to see Ajahn Panyawado's Kuti. It's just a mess. There's just books everywhere. And apparently, in response, Ajahn Mahabua just kind of, I imagine he spat in his spittoon. He was known to do that when he was presented with something he found silly. He just kind of spit out some betel nut, and then he looked at him and he's like, "Yeah, he's got a lot of books, but he knows where all of them are." And it was very interesting that Ajahn Mabua, despite teaching everybody to live simply, he could recognize the difference between attachment and accumulation, and just having resources. Yeah. Us in the West, we like our books. People who live in the jungles of Thailand don't have a lot of need for books. They get wet, they get moldy, they get eaten by bugs. But we grow up with books. We grow up with, libraries, and we're used to it. But the mark of mindfulness, the mark of wisdom that the teacher saw in his student, in Ajahn Paññāwātto, was that he was aware of all of them. They weren't just scattered about. It wasn't haphazard, but he was keeping track, and they were for a purpose. He just didn't have any way of, he didn't want to build a library. It would just take too long, so he just would have his books in stacks. Um, and this kind of points on to the sutta, the idea of contentment being a good path to follow, not non-contentment. And the word is santuti. And my teacher Ajahn Amaro would say, "Oh, santuti, santuti is a good thing because it has a tuti." Right? And so contentment is as a virtue in Buddhism, but sometimes being content is very funny, yeah? Because I became a monastic because I wanted to live very simply. I wanted to be a bhikkhu. Bhikkhu means beggar. I just wanted to be a hobo who would just be ignored by society and could come and go wherever I wanted. My name, Pamutto, means one who is free. I wanted to be a free spirit and have no attachments and to be able to just walk in any direction at any time I wanted. And very quickly, I found out that the monastery where I ordained was very well supported by people who had tons of faith. And so almost every single day, our lunch was this massive buffet. So while I had joined the monastic order in order to get simplicity, nothing was simple. Like in order to just get food to eat for the day, I'd have to walk by a line of 75 different items, and choose something nourishing from amidst all of those, even though I was not very good at choosing healthy things for myself to eat. And so I had to learn that pushing this away was not the teacher's instruction, was not a sign of contentment, but to just accept that this is the situation I'm at. And other times I would be out on alms round and I would get very small amounts of food would land in my bowl and I would eat every last crumb. And I wouldn't have to think about it at all. And I was also content with that, and learning this sense of recognizing our situations and not pushing back at them as a great way of coming to understand contentment. Contentment, we feel it, right? And it doesn't necessitate we live in a particular way, in a particular to a particular standard. It necessitates that we be happy and satisfied with the way that we are living, even if given the chance, we will readily quickly change anything. That's not a problem. If until we have that opportunity, we don't worry about it, then we're practicing contentment. Now, seclusion is a wonderful thing, as opposed to crowding, Sanghanikaya. So the Buddha encouraged seclusion, but it's not necessarily always being alone, always being off in the middle of nowhere, because we're very unlikely to learn a lot about ourselves if all we have is ourself, right? A lot of our defilements get shown in our interactions with other beings, right? So while it's true you can go off into the forest and your interactions with the ants and the squirrels and the monkeys, depending on where you're at, and all of that could teach you a lot about the nature of the world and beings and desire. You can learn pretty quickly if you're around a certain group of people, and not all the time though. And so Often, the question of should we be around others or not is not a yes or no situation, but is rather the quality of the people we choose to associate with. So if you say, is it better to associate with people or to be off on your own? Well, are those people Dhamma practitioners? Do they have a meditation practice? Do they know the teachings? Are they virtuous? Do they have precepts? Do they have a moral code? If that were the case, then avoiding those people doesn't do you any good necessarily. But does that mean you should immediately move in with them and spend every moment of every day with them? No, that's also not what it's not what the teaching encourages, right? But there is a time and a place. So rather than being rigid, we learn the right time and place to have association with good people and the right time and place to withdraw. And I've seen even for bhikkhus, for monastics, this is not something that's second nature for everyone. You would think that we ordain in order to go off into the woods and, live very simple and withdrawn lives. But some people they ordain and they're just always around others. And you don't necessarily look at them and say that that's wrong. It just means that their practice is going to be very different. Yeah. And the important thing is that they not get attached to the presence of others. Because if you've ever been at a retreat center or a temple, you'll know that the population is not stable. It's not the same people, but be, Buddhism practices, we're all about freedom. Yeah. Well, people come and go. It's all about impermanence, right? Well, I mean, even if the community stays stable for a time, it doesn't stay stable indefinitely. I mean, people die, or people come in, or people leave, people ordain, people disrobe. It's just the nature of things, right? So not to be attached to it. To energy and not to laziness. It's another simple instruction. So again, when we're assessing first thing in the morning, we hear the bell to go to chanting and we say, oh, should I or shouldn't I? The answer is probably we should, but not categorically, right? Sometimes the right thing to do if we're sick might be to just hold off, to just wait, and then we're not clinging to a principle. And sometimes if we've been trained to just do what we're told, to always just do what we're told, to follow the rules, to be a good little boy or girl, sometimes it might take more energy to stop and to think and to not do the habitual thing, right? And it's a very interesting principle where it encourages effort, encourages mindfulness, and encourages evaluation, right? Rather than just just do it or don't do it. Yeah. Again, we don't want to be limited in our options, but we want to consider. And finally, to being unburdensome and not being burdensome. And this is a slightly funny thing you could say for the Buddha to say to Mahāpajāpatī Gotamī, considering the interesting circumstances by which she got ordained. She kind of came to the Buddha and all with its whole crowd of women and said, "Oh, ordain us," and kind of put him on the spot. But out of a desire to be part of something good, to be part of the order, to have a chance at enlightenment, to have all of the wonderful benefits that male bhikkhus ordain for, yeah, to lead the holy life in its purest form. She wanted something for the right way. She didn't go about it particularly, but that's the thing, is the Buddha, he was not no, just no. He was no, and then there was compromise, right? He was flexible. He said this is going to complicate things. This is going to divide the order between these two orders. But it's very interesting. Within 10, 20 years, you find all of these instances in the Pali Canon where the Buddha says, um, he would not pass away until the fourfold Sangha had been established. Fourfold Sangha being bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, male lay people, female lay people, right? So somewhere in there was an expectation there would be two orders for men and for women. But then again, it was a burden, but it was a burden that the Buddha took on. And there's an interesting practicality of burdens, right? You find teachings in various Buddhist lineages, like I want to say sumo or tomo. There's some a Tibetan practice where you very consciously take on the suffering of other beings. Like you try to think of other beings and you try to imagine yourself like drawing it in and holding it. It's a form of building up the muscle of compassion, right? To imagine that you too have that suffering and you're bearing it with them. And it's a sort of a visualization. It's sort of a compassion practice. And you could look at that and you could say, oh, well, I mean, you don't have to do that. It's taking on this burden of somebody else's suffering. Would it be better to just not think about them? To live carefree like a bird just flying through the sky? Well, I mean, you look at it, and sometimes burdens have a purpose, like when we go to the gym to exercise, right? It's work. It takes effort, but it has a purpose. The important thing is that it's held, yeah, that we're not taking on too many burdens, right? That the burden that is posed is something that we're capable of managing. And in the ordination procedure for men and for women, it's built into the ordination. When you ordain, you have to be a novice first, and then you can become fully ordained. And so everybody does this two-step process. Um, and in that novice ordination, you go to a teacher and you say, "May you take me on as a burden." Yeah, and the teacher's response very beautifully is, "All right, I take you on as a burden, and may you take me on as a burden." It's sort of like striking of a deal. It's like, yeah, okay, you're you're not as far along on the path as I am. You need me for providing various services. I don't have to do this, right? But I can manage it. We have room for one more here at the temple, so we'll take you on. We'll put you in robes. We'll shave your head. We'll tell you when you're doing something wrong. We say, Venerable, we don't do things that way. It'll be work, but we'll do it, right? And in response, I recognize that even myself, no matter how many years I've been a monastic, I am a burden on others. I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to bathe, I need to wash my robes. Yeah, I need, well, I don't need electricity, but it's nice. It's nice to be able to talk to all of you. So it's a burden, there's a need that has to be fulfilled. And it's the other monastics in the lay community that bear that burden. I can't bear it all my own. I don't have a job. I can't pay for the electricity, right? So by sharing the burdens we have, it's not that we're shunning, avoiding, pushing away all burdens, but that we're mindfully with wisdom assessing what burdens we have. And when there are unnecessary burdens, we don't take them on. Yeah. And there's all sorts of examples of this. I mean, famously, and people are very, very shocked. But the Buddha would say, if you have one relative, if you're in one relationship, or you have one child, then you have one suffering. If you have two children, you have two sufferings. You have three children, you have three sufferings. This idea that we are burdens that each other has to bear, and so it's not that like everybody who had a kid is just by nature wrong, right? But when you're sitting and you're considering these things, you should consider that this will be extra responsibility. It's just all just fun and playing with Legos and all of the great parts of being a parent. Yeah, there's a lot of difficulties too. And when you're thinking about things in advance, you think about this. What I often encourage people when people who are trying to get a meditation practice going and they're thinking about getting a pet, I would say, okay, but consider the effect that's going to have on your ability to go on meditation retreat, right? You're going to be taking responsibility for that other creature's life. You're going to be binding yourself to them until either they die or another home for them is found. Do you realize the contract that you're signing there? You are the one with the thumbs. You are the one who opens the cat food can, right? So just take on burdens knowingly, right? And when you don't have to, when you find a cat, on your path as you're walking along, you don't have to adopt it, right? It might be cute. It might be scratching against your leg and purring. You still don't have to take on every single burden you meet, yeah? And sometimes knowing how to just politely decline a burden can be very graceful and a sign of great contentment. And as I use the example of like having a large buffet of food offered to me, and is this amazing dance where we get to see all of these principles play out every day at the meals in a temple or in a retreat center, right? Where you come up and you have all of these different kinds of food. And if nobody was there, completely on your own, you could just take what seems most nutritious and then walk away and you'd be fine. You'd be practicing not having many desires, not accumulating. You wouldn't be yoked to anything. Complete dispassion, right? But because the food is offered, with love and with devotion, and people are hanging around and they're offering, venerable, may this help sustain you for another day of practice. You feel encouraged to try things, right? Even things that you don't need. And you find this interesting way of how do you exert energy, how do you practice fewness of wishes and not gaining weight, but at the same time, be compassionate, be accepting, be sharing and receiving, right? And this is the highest form of this is this notion of not self, yeah? Where the only reason that you would struggle with this idea of, oh, yeah, 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 thank you. Oh, yeah, another helping, great. I don't know if I can finish it, but thank you. Oh, it's very nice. The highest form of this is you realize the only time you'll get caught is if you started thinking about yourself. What do I want? What is best for me in this situation? That is often when we plant our feet, some idea of I comes in there. And I think it's very curious that the letter I in the English language is so straight and so planted, isn't it? Right? It's almost like it's warning us to be careful of it. Yeah. So if we look at our intentions, yeah, and we see that I'm thinking about me and what I want, we can probably anticipate we're going to get caught on something, we're going to get stuck. But if we see, okay, how can I just get out of the way of myself? How can I just be open to the situation? How can we work out a compromise? How can we figure out the best way to do this? Almost always, we will see that while we don't necessarily have the best answer, we don't necessarily have an answer that satisfies everybody, and often there is no such answer. We will feel the difference, the flexibility, where we have a lot of answers as opposed to only one or two. We have a lot of different ways of responding just by virtue of relaxing and using these principles. Yeah? So if you did not catch that, this sutta is Anguttara Nikaya 8, and it is the 53rd sutta there, so 853. Yeah, it's a great one to look at. And if you're, as some of you are, of the nature to chant suttas, you might consider adding this one to your repertoire. It's very short, very snappy, very nice for daily recollections. Yeah. So on this Uposatha evening, I offer these thoughts for your reflection. I hope it can be of some use in your practice, but if not, again, don't accumulate, just throw it away and just wait for the next one. All right.